When I first saw the headline on this ArsTechnica article, I thought it had to be an irony. Of course prices rise when supply drops. But then, I read the article. When nearly 100 drugs became scarce between 2015 and 2016, their prices mysteriously increased more than twice as fast as their expected rate. An analysis recently published in the Annals of Internal Medicine reveals. The price hikes were highest if the pharmaceutical companies behind the drugs had little competition, the study also shows. Wow! Imagine that! It's as if the laws of economics actually work! The authors, a group of researchers at the University of Pittsburgh and one at Harvard Medical School, can't say for sure why the price has increased. Because apparently they haven't taken Econ 101. The price hikes may reflect manufacturers' opportunistic behavior during shortages, when the imbalance between supply and demand increases willingness to pay, they conclude. Oh, for crying out loud. What's happened here is that, due to government regulations and caps that the DEA has put on the amount of drugs manufacturers can make in a year, especially scheduled drugs such as opioids, it pushes the supply curve to the right. This means that firms can provide fewer of the item at every price level. The imbalance comes from the fact that the equilibrium price is now higher, and the equilibrium quantity lower. You have to raise the price to get it back into balance. If you don't, you have a shortage. This is basic economics, and it really sounds like they're trying to shoehorn the same fallacies behind the arguments about so-called price gouging into the drug market. There aren't a lot of industries where if a manufacturer botches the production of a product and is responsible for a reduction in supply, that they are able to profit from that. In every industry, if supply drops, prices rise. That doesn't necessarily mean more profit since fewer items are being sold. It all depends on the slope of the supply and demand curves. But manufacturers are completely incapable of manipulating those slopes. All they can do is try to set their price closer to equilibrium. To see an example of this happening in a different industry, in 1995 there was a fire at a factory that provided most of the dynamic RAM chips for computers. Up to this point, DRAM prices had dropped to historic lows, but in a matter of days, DRAM prices quadrupled, and didn't come down until the next year when other factories managed to increase their output to compensate. Anytime you have a supply shock like this, increased price is the result. It's the same thing here. Pharmaceutical companies have to increase the price of drugs when their supply gets restricted. Their look into the connection between price increases and shortages adds to a long-held observation among hospitals and analysts that such shortages are costly. Yes, together with all of economics, as detailed in Alfred Marshall's book Principles of Economics in 1890, you people are only 120 years behind the times. If you had an anti-vaxxer who didn't know about Pasteur, or a creationist who didn't know about Mendel, you'd think there was something seriously wrong with them, and you'd know not to give them the time of day. Yet this level of backwardness in economics is not only accepted, it's pervasive throughout the news media. When a preferred drug is hard to come by, doctors can turn to less effective, potentially more expensive drugs, as well as delay treatment or cut back on dosages. Well, what do you expect them to do? They'd get the drug if they could. And if government weren't placing these ridiculous limitations on them, they would. So why aren't you complaining about those? Why does government never get the blame for the horrible consequences of its own regulations? For one example, look at the Drug Quality and Security Act, signed into law in 2013 by Barack Obama. This track and trace legislation puts serious delays into the supply chain of prescription drugs. Another limitation is the FDA's CGMP, or Current Good Manufacturing Practices, which seriously limits how and where new startups can form. One way the market has of dealing with the issue of increasing prices is incentivizing the creation of new competitors, like how competitors stepped in to increase the supply of DRAM. CGMP gets in the way of that, even for drugs where the patent has expired. There are also the caps I mentioned, not only from the DEA, but also caps put on Medicare and Medicaid patients. This article doesn't mention any of these. Moreover, the size of that increase for individual drugs was linked to competition. The scarce drugs that had 3 or fewer competitors collectively held their price increases at about 12% more before shortages. That rate leapt to 27% afterward. On the flip side, drugs with plenty of competition, more than 3 competitors, saw their rates increase by just 2.5% before a shortage and a little under 5% afterward. In other words, if you have a shortage, prices rise. And the less competitive the market, the more prices rise, and the prices take longer to go back to normal since there aren't as many companies to take up the slack. And this is news to whom? But all of this really sounds like a good reason to get rid of these regulations and limitations and let a competitive market produce enough supply to meet the demand while keeping prices low. Because those restrictions not only create the shortage to begin with, they stop the market from responding to the shortage. Ordinarily, the higher price would be a signal to firms to step up production, increasing supply and lowering price. But regulations stop them from doing precisely that. And check this part out. If manufacturers are observed using shortages to increase prices, public payers could set payment caps for drugs under shortage and limit price increases to those predicted in the absence of a shortage. Yeah, price caps. Absolutely nothing bad ever happened with those, said absolutely nobody who lived through World War II. You can deny the laws of economics all you want, but you can never change them. And it's ridiculous to be surprised by the fact that they still apply. And you also shouldn't deny that videos like this cost money, but you watching and sharing helps a lot. Also, please consider using the links below to give a one-time donation via PayPal or crypto, or become a regular supporter at Patreon. And please hit like and subscribe and keep an eye out for more videos from this channel. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay strong and be free.